Hello, Travis.
Hello.
Okay, I'm here with Travis Gafford, and I'm going to do one of my grilled interviews with him. Okay, so the place I want to start with you, if I ever do an interview with a player, okay, or say like a caster or something, I never ask one of the really hacky questions that you can ask, which is like, why did you start doing this or whatever? Because really the answer should be obvious. It's like they really liked the game, or they really like competition, or they're really interested in the game, okay. But with you, I actually think it's warranted as a question, just because your style of how you do things isn't, at least on the surface, of someone who's like a diehard nerd aficionado. Like the game is like everything to them.
Right.
And so when I ask you this question, like what makes you want to do in interviews or be a journalist in League of Legends, don't tell me like how you did, like, oh, well, I was at school and then I did this or that. I want to know why. So why be an interviewer? Why be a journalist in League of Legends?
Why be an interviewer or journalist in League of Legends? Specifically League of Legends because I like the game a lot, and I felt like the scene, like, I know you don't want me to go into the history, I will just provide the context for why I did that, right? Which was that, like, I was a big fan of StarCraft esports, and I mean, people will note, obviously, some to annoyance, that my brand State of the League is based off of State of the Game, which was JP's show, a big show, and most popular show in StarCraft. So I had been a big fan of StarCraft esports and really wanted to do something like that in League of Legends. And at that time I was like, you know, I want to, like, why don't I care about League of Legends esports the same way I care about StarCraft esports? So out of that came this realization that, like, there wasn't, like, at the time when I started, a lot of content around the players, or, you know, who do I cheer for? Who do I care about? Like, Hotshot has a funny stream. Do I care about him? Like, so I think a lot of the reason why, you know, if you were hinting at this, maybe you weren't, but I know a lot of people feel like my interviews tend to oftentimes stray at some point in time away from the game and more towards just like featuring the player's personality. I really felt like I wanted people that are into League of Legends and are curious about League of Legends esports to be able to become fans of the players, right? Like, do you care about Doublelift because he's like this funny, silly dude that's ridiculous? Do you care about Skara because he's more analytical and has like really interesting opinions on things? So when I decided to start doing this stuff, the objective was, you know, not only, you know, the traditional thing of like provide information to fans about like why a player did a thing in a game or whatever, but also to help cultivate like fans around these players and help build them as personalities and figures, because in my opinion, they don't always have like the best way to do that on their own. And I'm usually pretty good at talking to people, and I have a degree and that kind of thing. So, you know, if I can use the skill set that I have to bring it out, that's why.
So since State of the League is basically where, if you chart back, that's really where you appear on the scene, okay? That's what you become initially known for, even though now people probably know you for the interviews.
Right.
The main area of contention that you hinted at there, that people who criticize you have about State of the League, is always, well, you just kind of copied that off State of the Game. That's what they'll say, okay?
Right.
Now, obviously, State of the Game itself, it's not like some genius concept. Like, it's basically what the equivalent of like a Google Hangout type thing now, but just using Skype. It's just a Skype call with video chat, basically. So it's a simple idea. But I think the thing I wanted to ask about this was, when you made it, like the most obvious thing to me is, why call it State of the League? Like, isn't that almost going to play into those people? Like, why didn't you just call it like Circle of Summoners, or why not something more League related?
No, it's an understandable question. I mean, there's a couple of reasons to it. One was, so you mentioned, by the way, that it was when I first appeared on the scene. That is literally when I first appeared on the scene, because Doublelift at the time, and people know the story, but he had, I've mentioned that I wanted to get into esports, and I had mentioned to him, I was jealous of the fact that he got to do this cool esports stuff, and he suggested that I do interviews. And so, again, wondered why I wasn't interested in League of Legends. And again, I got interested in StarCraft a lot because of State of the Game. And that was one of the lifelines for me on being interested in the scene, was watching State of the Game. So the decision for me was, rather than just do like generic kind of boring interviews, why don't I create a show where people can interact with each other, that kind of thing. And of course that was based off of State of the Game. So I was like, okay, well, what am I going to call this? And I went through some really shitty ideas. In fact, Doublelift tried to help me, and both of us couldn't come up with really anything interesting. And at the same time, I felt kind of weird. I felt weird calling it like Circle of Summoners or something like that, because I intended to replicate State of the Game. I felt like it was such a really good idea, and I really wanted that in League of Legends. So in my mind, it was like, well, I could just call it that and everybody would know that I'm just kind of ripping it off, or I could be like obvious about it and say like, hey, I'm basing this off of this because I like it so much, and like I'm in it as like an homage to the show that inspired it, and I contacted JP about it and spoke with him at BlizzCon. Like I remember walking up specifically to him at BlizzCon and saying, hey, do you mind if I'm using this? I emailed him first, didn't get a response from him, which is understandable because esports people get a ton of emails from people about random projects and can always return to them. But so I found him at BlizzCon and specifically asked him, are you okay with me doing this? And he said, yeah, no problem, dude. And so at that point in time, I figured it was cool. So yeah, I understand why there's people that will say you just kind of ripped it off. Again, I sort of agree with your sentiment that like it's not I love the concept, but I also don't think that a show of panelists discussing a topic is unique to State of the Game. And I kind of hope that there's going to be one for Dota. I know there's kind of similar ones to it. Like I think it's really good to have something like that in each scene. And for me, again, since I was so inspired by that show, that was where I wanted to sort of make a call out to it and be obvious rather than just like being like, ah, screw it, let's call it this, and pretend that I came up with the idea all on my own.
One of the things about State of the Game, the actual original, is that it actually has a really conflicting reputation, okay, where initially people always used to say on the StarCraft Reddit, like, oh, you know, now it's just like drama and the news. Like, I want it to be like the old times. Like, I remember when they had a really awesome talk about like PVZ or something. I want it to be more like in-depth and analytical, you know. And they actually tried to revamp it and do something similar with that. Mm-hmm. But the best hits and the most numbers, and when people really fondly think of that show, it's all the drama. That's all they remember. They remember when someone had an argument or when something happened in the scene and people made, you know, in control said something funny about it or whatever. So I think people who say that are just like trying to be too cool for school in a way, like, oh, I just want to be really analytical, because I get the sense most people watch those shows like they wish that those were their friends basically, and that right. When stuff happened, that could be the chat they could have. They're sort of like getting to eavesdrop in on it. Okay, the reason I asked this is because it seems like with State of the League, you actually never really tried to make it that analytical or like that in-depth on these patch notes and stuff. A lot of what people remember, the best moments, were these like drama bombs or having people on who don't like each other or something.
Or so drunk episodes.
So were you actually, do you feel like, was this like your idea with it? Were you trying to cater to that audience? What do you think of this?
So generally speaking, the way that I think I would have wanted to do more analytical stuff now. At the time, I was so inexperienced and immature about stuff, and in a lot of ways, I still am. But I've learned so much in the past 2 years. So I think a lot of that was just a failure of structure and experience, and including a lot of the analytical stuff. Now, that being said, I still, at the time, tried to structure, like it generally ended up being about 2 hours long. And I tried to structure the first half to... I think that the way I did it was like it was all the tournaments and all the things that were happening and all the news, and that was where like the drama stuff usually came out and that kind of thing. And I tried to center the second part of the show around like patch notes and that kind of thing. Like we did go over patch notes and I bring it up, and it was a constant battle for me at the time to make that part compelling, because I was like, because unlike StarCraft and League, there's patch notes almost every week. So at least at the time there was. And so it was hard for me. I remember struggling, like, do I just read each patch note out? Do I like ask the pro players like what parts they think are significant? So while I did, I think, and try to include analytical stuff, and I think to an extent I did, I don't think that it was ever that good. And yeah, I actually feel as though the stuff that people, I agree with you. I think that the stuff that people are most interested in is the drama or the comedy or just hearing pro players be pros. And so that's, I think, why, and that's the stuff that I tend to be stronger at anyway. You know, somebody like Monte Cristo or whatever does solid analytical interviews and that kind of thing. And so I think that's why it ended up being remembered more for that kind of thing, and why I ended up just sort of inadvertently focusing more in that area than others.
Everyone on Reddit asks you, when is State of the League coming back, okay? But the problem with this issue is, the fact that it's never been like full on addressed anywhere makes it seem like conspicuous as the fact that like, well, is it coming back? Like, can it ever come back? Is it even allowed to come back?
Yeah.
And so as a result, there's going to be all these conspiracy theories hatched. Now, I'll give you my own one, which was when I first heard that you hadn't done it in so long, and then I saw how LCS was structured, and then I saw that in your Doublelift interviews, the manager has to be like sat in the background.
Right.
I thought to myself, actually, this probably makes sense. Okay, I figure maybe you're not allowed to do State of the League because the last thing they want is like Saint Vicious coming on drunk and then talking to Doublelift, who then talks to someone else, and then you discuss the game as well. Like, is it true that you actually are in any way limited in terms of doing like, could you do State of the League tomorrow? Would the players do it? Would Riot let you do it? Could it happen tomorrow if you wanted?
All right, sure. No, this is, I will full on address this right now. I've sort of hinted around it at times. It is like, okay, so State of the League sort of stopped happening before LCS even existed, right? Before those contracts, it basically went on hiatus, and it's been hard for me to do it since. I've done a few, but for the most part, it stopped being a weekly show, probably in the second half of last year. That was before contracts existed with LCS or with Riot or whatever. So the reason being was that the show was really easy to do in the beginning. To an extent, it's hard to manage pro players and get them on and that kind of thing, especially in the league scene, but especially since it was less structured. But for the most part, pro players at that time did not have any structured practice. Teams would go into tournaments having played nothing but solo queue beforehand, and there was nothing that the team had to organize scrims or that kind of thing. So they had a lot of free time. These guys weren't doing this as a full-time career. A lot of them were in school or doing this on the side, and thus like there were not hard time conflicts. Starting, I think, in the second half of last year, especially as we ramped up to Worlds for Season 2, teams started to really put in place structure. They got team houses, and they started to scrim against each other and that kind of thing. And at that point, it started to become a real struggle to organize, very frequently, multiple, like, generally speaking, the ideal thing for me is like 3 or 4 team players from different teams. And coordinating all those people into one time slot is extremely hard to do for a couple of reasons. Like sometimes players are flaky. I remember specifically I would plan a show, announce it, and then somebody would say, "Oh, sorry, I had a scrim and my manager didn't know," or whatever. And so it ended up becoming a really, really hard thing to schedule this stuff. I'll admit 2 things about LCS. One is that when LCS came in, it cranked that up to 11. Now all these pro players, a lot of the teams scrim or practice or go over stuff for like 10 hours a day, 6 days a week, and it is way, way, way harder. In the time that they aren't doing something that's related to getting better at the game, they are doing sponsor obligations or fulfilling sponsor obligations or whatever. Like pretty much all the content you see come out of players right now, like let's say CLG and Vulcan and Cloud9, their content, probably some of their most popular content is on the iBuyPower blog, which is an iBuyPower sponsored content site, and you know those guys are getting paid for that content. It's very hard to do any kind of long form time commitment content that isn't somehow bringing money back into the team, because those guys already have the obligations and their time is so valuable. So if I ask them, hey, can you block out 2 hours on a Wednesday, it's really hard for them because I might be able to get like Doublelift, but maybe if I want Saint Vicious on, Curse is doing something or whatever. And then finally, on top of all the organizational issues, there's like, well, like first off, they tend to want to do something else with that time because they've been talking about League and playing League and all that kind of thing. And then on top of that, there's, I think, just a situation that's occurred where their time is so valuable, like literally monetarily valuable, that it is sometimes hard for them to justify doing a show like State of the League for free. On top of that, I will admit that I have doubts about something like a drunk State of the League happening again because of not just Riot, though yes, partially for Riot, but also a lot of the sponsors and structure that the teams are adding, and the fact that teams and players now, Saint Vicious 2 years ago had a tier list of women, and it was like tier 1 is this woman, tier 2 these women, whatever, and they were all women from the scene. Yeah. That would never ever occur now. the scene has changed dramatically forever in terms of the professional stuff that you need out of these players and that kind of thing. So I think for something like a drunk State of League, that it would be hard to get around Riot. I don't think that a normal State of League would be an issue. I mean, everybody knows that in the contract that there is, like, that all LCS players sign, that there's a paragraph about specifically talking about players speaking out against the best interest in Riot Games. And you can have a discussion about whether or not that's a good idea or not. But I think that there was a lot of conflicts, especially in the beginning of LCS, around players having to adjust to saying something like, I disagree with Zyra's new changes because I feel like it maybe makes her a little more passive, rather than Riot is retarded, I can't believe they would make that decision, this will ruin her, she's a shitty champion now.
Those are the same two answers though.
Yeah, they are. No, 100%. However, one of them is very, very negative connotation towards Riot, and another one of them is like, well, I respectfully disagree, essentially, right? And so I think that there was a lot of that players having to navigate that new situation with Riot, and I think a lot of that, like, they sort of adapted and gotten used to it. So I think that now a regular State League could exist, and that wouldn't be that much of a concern. Again, that was never why it didn't exist in the start of this year. So I still think it can come back, but sponsors and also Riot will probably make it unlikely that something like a drunk State of League can occur. Now, I'll still try and do it, and perhaps, and that's like, by the way, that's not me approaching Riot and being like, hey, can I do a drunk State League? That's me approaching a team, and then the team deciding whether or not there's a risk between their relationship with Riot on something like that. But I would not be surprised if something like that cannot occur in the future. Maybe it will, and maybe it'll just have to be with people that aren't in the LCS. So there's a lot of different things on what's happening with State League. Oh, finally, the reason I do plan on bringing it back, I've already said that I want to bring it back. My solution to bringing it back is to, and I've just like beaten around the bush about this for like a year, so I'll just like straight up say it. My solution to bringing it back is making it an hour rather than 2 hours, so that it is not as much of a time commitment for players, 50% less. Making it more structured and professional so that it's more appealing to like a third-party content creator or organizer, whatever you want to call, like a GameSpot or a Machinima or something like that. And then working directly with like a GameSpot or a Machinima to do the production, and also possibly, and this is something where I'm not sure yet, maybe they would just make a deal with the team or something like that to pay the players for it. But I think that I'm not in the position anymore as a sole individual to make it worth the pro players' time to be on the show, and thus I need either a company like GameSpot or Machinima or somebody like that, maybe even just like a regular sponsor like iBuyPower could sponsor State League. Either they have to pay the players for it, or they have to create some sort of incentive bonus to do that. That's my general sentiment. Maybe I'm completely wrong and I'll be able to do it without that, but for the time being, that's sort of the direction that I'm looking, and so we'll see how that pans out in the future.
So you mentioned the impetus to even get into the scene as a journalist came via Doublelift, okay?
Right.
Now, this is something that I'm pretty sure I've never seen you directly address, because it's going to sound, so someone who loves Travis, like, whoa, how can you ask him that question?
No, I'm almost certain you're going to ask.
Yeah, you know what's coming. Yeah. So basically, people who don't like you, who are also journalists, are going to look and see, okay, Doublelift is like the biggest grossing guy in terms of view numbers, even to this day, okay? And if you can get an interview with him, anyone who gets an interview with him is almost guaranteed to get a lot of hits, okay? Yeah. So they're going to look at the fact that this is the impetus for you getting into the scene. The fact that you know the guy so well and you have this history with him means you can get lots of interviews and you can constantly have them. Yeah. And in general, they are the backbone of your work. Even if you do the other interviews, you've done maybe 10 times more with Doublelift than anyone else, okay?
Understandable.
But so people are going to say, would Travis be who he is today? Would he be in the position he's in today without Doublelift? Would you still get into the scene? Could you still have the same reach? Would you still have the same in with the players? Because it sounds like there's something helped out here. What do you think?
Yeah. No, the answer is fuck no, I would not be here. I'll say that very, very strongly. I am very, very proud to say that Doublelift helped me out a lot. That being said, the question I thought you were going to go with was a question that I was terrified of as I was starting off in the scene and starting to do State League, which was this assumption that I had invited Peter, or Double, to come live with me initially so that I could use him to get into the scene.
Okay.
And that to me is like the darker, scarier question, because that is not the case at all. And sorry, I'm just tangenting so that I can address this as well. But whenever I invited him to move in with me, it was simply a situation of, I have an open apartment room, and he lives near me, and I identified with the situation because I sort of bounced around a bunch of different friends' places before my first year of college, and at the time that was his plan, was to go into college, and so I just volunteered it. And so no, once he did move in with me, he was, like I said, the one that suggested that I start doing interviews in the scene. I wish I could just be like, yeah, that was all me. I came up with that idea, especially because sometimes Double is so dumb and it's like ridiculous that I owe the idea of entering the scene to this guy. As much as I love him, it's so funny. And yeah, as soon as I got into the scene, or as soon as he made the suggestion, I said, okay, well, do you know anybody that can be on the show? And the very first episode 0, which was just a dry run, was like him, his girlfriend, SYDTKO, Tom, who was his really good friend and duo Q partner at the time, and I think his teammate, and then like one of my friends and Westrice's girlfriend. And so yeah, like he put me in touch with SYDTKO, and he helped. I promoted the show, but I think he tweeted about it or something. And it's actually kind of funny because after, I think he put me in touch with Dyrus, which I think Dyrus and Pure Golden Boy were on episode 1 or 2. So like Peter introduced me to 1 or 2 or 3 people. And then after that, I almost didn't bug Peter about helping me get in touch with people, because Peter was, as sometimes as immature and silly as he can be now. At the time, he was considerably more immature and lazy, and just didn't feel like helping me at all get connected to more people. And so it was pretty much me bugging like SYDTKO, hey, like I don't know these people. Do you have anybody that you suggest that we could invite on or whatever? So like he helped me get like the first 1 or 2 people, and then after that more people through those people, and so the network spread out like that. So to imply that if anybody ever wants to imply that like Peter just brought all these people to me, I'm just gonna call him Peter because that's what I call him, and that it was just like me sitting back being like, no problem, Peter will just set me up in this like luxurious situation where I've got all these available individuals, isn't really the way it works. Anyway, answering directly, would I be here without him? Again, no, I would not be. I'm very, very happy and proud of the fact that he helped me and of the story that the two of us have. And I'm very, very thankful to him as a friend. I also feel like I put in a considerable amount of work on my own and commitment, and like jumping ship from the career that I had at the time to try and give it up, to try and do it. Like there was an opportunity that was presented to me, and I put in a decent amount of work and hope and persistence to make that get me to where I am. So I wouldn't say that where I'm at today is only because of what he did, but yes, it's definitely like one of the founding roots of that situation.
Does he to some degree still carry you today? Because let me put it this way, okay, during LCS you did an interview every week, I believe.
Yes.
And not only that, I think it just roughly from what I saw, I didn't have time to check every figure obviously, I would probably put the stats at something like maybe 40% of your total hits and views in League of Legends are just Doublelift interviews, or Doublelift on a show that you're on, or something like that. I mean, is there ever too many Doublelift interviews? Will this always be a core driving force of Travis?
It's an interesting question. I mean, I don't know if it's 40%. It might be. I've never looked at it.
I mean, they're the highest grossing ones.
Yeah, no way. They are the highest grossing stuff, right? I think there's a lot of different reasons for that. I think if first off, if we're talking about like the 2.5 years that I've been doing this, Peter was nowhere near the figure that he is today, right? Like he used to be pretty popular, but like the big figures were like Hotshot GG and Froggen when he came out, and God, Dyrus was like the big guy, like there were these like Reginald, and especially this year, Doublelift grew in crazy popularity. So it's not as though, like, if I would agree that to date he is a huge percentage of the traffic and views and that kind of thing, but I don't think that that extends all the way back. And if it does, that has a lot more to do with the fact that he and I were just close and we're more likely to do content than like me and Dyrus, for example. Today, yeah, I would say that you're right. I do one interview per week with him. That was not initially the plan at the start of the LCS. In fact, I think if you look, like the first couple of weeks, I do one with them, like maybe like every one or third or something like that. The weekly Doublelift interview phenomena kind of just grew out of like a very hungry demand for that kind of content and a realization that like the community really wanted to see us just like goof around, which is why right now he and I are looking into other kinds of cool content that the two of us can do, like outside of just an interview. And so yeah, like I agree that a lot of the views are that, and I would also say that I'll admit and freely say that yeah, like I do that because it's what people want. But like especially as I transitioned over to GameSpot, my financial situation is not directly tied to the amount of traffic that I get, and so when I do the Doublelift interview, it's not because necessarily it'll get so much hits and I'll make so much money. It's more tied to the fact that like people freaking love that stuff, and if people really like it, and like I said, like I want to do stuff that fans like and that will build fans out of other people and that kind of thing. And honestly, I have a hell of a fun time doing those interviews with Peter. Like they're really hilarious. So it's never necessarily about it's not entirely, maybe a small component of it, but it's not entirely about the views that it gets. It's much more about the enjoyment that I get out of it, the community wanting it, that kind of thing. So I think I'd still be around today if it wasn't for Doublelift content. I think people like stuff that I do with other people. I mean, there's other content that I do that does almost as well. Like every time I do a Probably interview, people love that stuff. And I've had other big hits, you know, like Dire stuff still does well. And people will enjoy random stuff that I do. You know, like when I did I do random stuff at events. Like I'll do like a feature. Like at semis, I did a feature where it was like, here's all the different pro players making predictions for the Fnatic Royal game, and people like that stuff too. So I don't think that I'm necessarily carried by Doublelift content, but I would say yeah, it's probably a pretty decent reason why I'm here, and it continues to be a pretty decent reason why I'm successful.
One of the downsides of being so known for the Doublelift interviews, and especially the style of them, because they're joking in nature,
right?
Well, Doublelift as a personality, he doesn't even need any prompting, and he's gonna say like 5 things in an interview that could all be a headline on their own.
Yeah.
In other people's interview, that'd be like the one headline, and then he'd go to the interview and be like, is that all he said, you know? But he's gonna say these things every interview anyway. So people are gonna say, you know, do you feel at all like, is it easy to do a Doublelift interview? I mean, put it this way, is there a degree to which you ever do prompt him in certain directions, or you know, like, if I say this, then he's going to say that, and that's going to make the interview like, I've almost got what I wanted there. If you could just, you know, I need the line. Is this ever a component?
I don't think there's ever like directly this thing where I'm like, I just need him to say this one sentence. Like there's never a time where I'm like, I really need him. I really need him to say, like, there's never a time where I'm like, I really need him to say Sjokz is shit. But yeah, no, like the Doublelift interviews are strange. They're this very, very strange thing for me, right? Because like generally speaking, the way that I always formatted them was like, okay, we talk about maybe the game for 5 minutes, or you know, I do like the standard interview. I try to start off every Doublelift interview as like a standard LCS interview that I do with anybody else, right? Which is like, what happened in that game? Why did you decide to play this champion? Blah, blah, blah. And then usually, like in fact, in some interviews, I've specifically said, all right, now we are cutting and moving into like the ridiculous center. And at that point in time, it almost becomes like morning radio show, you know, where like it's just Peter and I saying all sorts of silly stuff. And so at that point in time, that's where like some of the comments sometimes will say like, oh, Doublelift and Travis have such crazy synergy. And yeah, like he and I know each other so well that both of us know what to say for it to be very funny, or for him to say something ridiculous or something like that. And so at that point in time, it definitely lapses into entertainment. Like, there's no way that Doublelift talking about the Twitter honeys he's going to meet in Diamond Bar whenever the team moves to that team house is like proper esports journalism. And so, yeah, like at a certain point in time, it does lapse into me knowing what ridiculous things to bring up and sort of being entertaining. But I mean, people enjoy that. I have a lot of fun with it, and so I don't really regret that kind of thing. And feel free to like rephrase the question or whatever if I've fallen away from what you were originally asking.
The thing is, I actually have another like that, which is almost like the mirror opposite. Okay, so that the first question makes it sound like, well, you do these Doublelift interviews because, you know, you throw something out there, Doublelift's just hitting home runs out the park. Okay, it's giving you great content. Yeah. But actually, I have a criticism that comes from the other side that I don't think you'll have ever heard before. It goes like this. I actually get the sense when I watch some of the Doublelift interviews, he would say even crazier shit. But because of the modern context, LCS, Riot, Kelby, you actually sometimes try to rein him in a bit, or you start him down a course and you can sort of see like where he's going to be in 2 leaps. Yeah. And you're sort of like, let's cut off and go back over here. Is this true to some degree? Do you ever get a bit like self-conscious of the fact that, yeah, this guy's giving you great content, but he's your friend as well, and you don't want people to think he's an idiot or he's too cocky?
No. It's never about people thinking that he's an idiot or he's too cocky, because I'm more than willing to have people think that of Peter. I think he deserves it to some extent. You're right, though, in that there are times where I rein in stuff that I know that he shouldn't say. And you know why I do that? It's not because I want to protect him. It's because I want to save my video producer editing time. Like, in the modern context of LCS or whatever, again, St. Vicious's women's tier list cannot exist. And so and my philosophy has always been, and I think that this is kind of like a general philosophy amongst a lot of people, that if a player says something that would be damaging to a sponsor's relationship or something like that, and they have the right, or the manager who might be sitting in the room has the right to request that is removed from the interview. So whenever I start to feel like he's going to a dark place, or he might make a joke that is racially insensitive or something like that, you know, not to say that he necessarily would, but whenever I feel like the movement is heading in that direction, yeah, like I will kind of rein him in. But I think I would probably do that for any pro player that I felt was likely to do something that I would have to cut or would be useless or something like that. Because generally speaking, you don't want the cut, because the way the cuts work is you have to, you might move, maybe if they say one bit in like a really good conversation about this one thing, like it might just not be something that you can edit correctly, and you lose a lot more. And so I try to not just save my video producer time, but also try to keep the content in the interview rather than like having to butcher it because this guy says something and he's not done with his media training yet or something, and you have to chop up the interview and it's a waste anyway. So and like I said, like even beyond that, there can be a discussion about whether or not we should be editing anything out of an interview. But I know that generally speaking, like if you just told somebody to fuck off and posted the interview, you would just never get an interview with that organization again. So, I mean, yeah, like to answer your question, yes, I do rein them in sometimes. But I don't think I do that just for him. I mean, there's other people that are likely to do that kind of thing too. And that's just sort of the situation that I'm in.
So when you described earlier your thought behind, like, you don't just, you want to show like the person behind the player, okay? You want people to be interested in that as well, and to know like why it's even cool to follow someone as a person. Like, oh, I found out his because of what I've now found out beyond just what he does in the server, okay? Yeah. That shows that like actually there's a philosophical drive behind the way you're actually doing things. Yeah. But at the same time, I've seen every time you address, like on Reddit or on maybe some of your shows, how you do this format. You mentioned something like you said before, like I do a few minutes of like the game.
Yeah, I do 50-50.
Okay, so you always, that's it right there. You always give a very generous number, okay? It's always like, oh, I do like half this and then half that. Yeah. And it makes it sound like you want to get like street cred from both. Like, you know, I'm getting like the analytical stuff and the in-game, but then I go into, you know, my bit after that. But actually, for this, I did actually break down the numbers. Okay. And it's not even close to 50-50. Or everyone. In general, I would say the split goes like this. It's about 30% to do with an actual game the player either just played or the game itself. Then 30% is like scene drama, like what they think of another player as a person or something, like this guy, this guy dissed you, or you know, your team lost this week. That's like tangentially connected to the game. Then it's just like the other stuff. Okay, so lighthearted stuff. But the reason why I think you've like skewed the numbers a bit is because, say the player is something saying about the game, but then you think of a joke, you won't go, oh, I'll save that for 5 minutes from now, because it's a joke. You know, you're going to go straight into it right there. So even the part that you do about the analytical part of the game, I think is already sort of imbued with what's going to come later. The more lighthearted stuff is already like draining into that. So why try to say you do the analytical stuff that much? Even if you do it through your own prism of Travis, don't you?
Right. So okay, first off, like I would want to see specifically like what, like I'm not necessarily doubting your statistics, but like before I even have the discussion of, oh, why do I say this and not actually do it? I would personally want to see like how that breaks down, like and what interviews like are skewing it in that direction. Like if you're looking at 1 week of LCS interviews and like you're looking at like what the math is, right? So if you're averaging everything out and between all these different interviews, and that's,
well, I mean, like I say, even the section that would be about the game at the beginning, will have the jokes in, and it'll already be sort of leading you towards the direction you're going to go later anyway. So you're thinking of it in your mind like you have a threshold point, like now we go in, like with the Doublelift thing, now we go into the comedy section, okay. But actually, I think that sort of drains into this part anyway, which isn't to say it's a negative, it's just I think that that's like the way you approach everything, you know. So even when you're approaching the analytical thing, you're bringing some of that into it anyway. So I just wanted to know why you... I'm not saying that's bad. I'm just saying I wonder why you try to sort of cling to the idea that, no, I do 50-50. You know, I am trying to do analytical stuff. I'm trying to get into the game as well, guys. Like, why not just embrace the fact that you're Travis all the time?
So, okay. First off, like, I'm not sure if I'm clinging to it, because I still feel as though, like, even if I'm doing funny stuff in the analytical part or the game part, I am also trying to, like, I feel like I'll try to get back on track afterwards. You know, like I might make a joke, and then the next question, and maybe we'll have a little fun stuff around that, and then the next question is like, all right, so what do you think of, you know, like this team's changing or something like that. And I also wouldn't say that, so I know you broke it down to like 30% game analysis, like 30% like scene stuff. I would call the scene stuff like storyline stuff. Okay. Because I'm really big on, I mean, that's another component of why I do the interviews, right? Is that I really want to help develop storylines, right? And if I'm asking like CLG what it's like to play Loco Doco if they make it into Quantic, or if Quantic makes it into LCS, like I would still qualify that as like something that's a more serious, like journalistic-y question, because I feel like it covers like a storyline that's going on.
Is it that serious though? Isn't some of that always tinged with drama as well? A lot of that's always like the context lends to the lifestyle element, the drama element of like, it's not just that you're going to play this team, it's that, you know, they were your rivals, or, you know. Yeah,
I mean, but the drama stuff is, I still think it is kind of serious, because like I would consider drama stuff more like, you know, this person said something about a player's girlfriend on Twitter or something like that. But I actually think that the drama stuff that is, how does it feel to play, like if Gambit had played Curse in Worlds, like Curse had made it in or something like that, I think that it is a serious question to be like, hey, you know, how much does it affect you that you're going to be going up against Edward, Alex? And is that like, is there a desire for you to beat him, or is there like, is it stress you out, or do you just approach it like anything like that? That is definitely drama, right? But I also think that it's still contextually like a serious question about the state of the game that they're going to be playing, no pun intended, and that, you know, they're going to, like, it's more of still a serious question, right? Even if I phrase it in kind of a funny way, like that is still a question that I would hope that would be asked in any interview, regardless of how analytical or silly it is, you know? Like, that's a really interesting question. I mean, I feel like the storylines are a huge component of the game and the scene and all that kind of thing. All right, so I would still say that that's part of that. So I'm not saying that I would argue that I'm not clinging to it, but I will answer like, why do I have that goal? Even if I'm not meeting it. Maybe I'm fucking up and I'm not meeting it. Like, I need to go back maybe and look at it. I'm not saying I am, but perhaps I am. And I know, I just wanted to make you laugh, Thorin. So maybe I am. If that's the case, I would like to alter that and change it back to the other ratio, because I don't want to embrace this idea of like, oh, you know, I'm the guy that does the comedic stuff, like the Doublelift interviews or whatever. Like, I'm actually very upset, not very upset, but somewhat disappointed that amongst some, there is a theory that I am incapable of doing a grilled interview or something like that, because I do this funny stuff. Like, oh, Travis is a comedian or an entertainer. I don't like that, because again, my goal when I started off was not just to show the player personality, but also to provide real good answers and content and stuff for the people that want to know why a player fucked up in a game or why a team lost. And so if the perception is ever that I'm not able to do that kind of thing, I feel like I lose a lot of the credibility and my brand starts to go in a direction that I don't necessarily want it to go. And so much of, I mean, a lot of, not just in esports, but in a lot of things, but specifically I've noticed in esports that there's a perception is a huge, like community perception is a huge factor in how people look at like content. So like, even if I did like a very analytical interview and I have a joke at the end of it, if people's idea of me is that I'm an entertainer, they're going to focus in on the joke and their memory won't necessarily recall the analytical stuff. So again, like my goal has always been to be able to serve both sides. I think you can kind of look like, so Pluto used to do League of Legends interviews, now he's over at Dawngate, and I feel like his stuff tended to, him and like maybe Hotbit, right? Tend to do like the more comedic stuff. I feel like somebody like Slasher or you tend to do like the more serious stuff, and my hope has always been to hit right in the middle where I can sort of help do stuff on both sides. And so if it ever seems like I'm clinging to something, or if I'm saying that this is my goal, even if I'm not meeting it, it's because I really have a desire to hit right there in the middle and provide both sides to everyone.
So this is something I want to get into, but I'll get into it like this, okay? I've got like a context question before I can go into my main question. It goes like this. If I think myself of how I would follow a game, any game I get into, okay, League of Legends would actually be a weird exception because I actually did interviews before I'd ever watched or played the game.
Right.
I didn't actually have an initial interest in the game just in and of itself. If esports didn't exist, I probably would never play it, okay?
Right.
But for every other game I've ever followed, to me, the question as to why you'd be so interested in doing interviewing, to me, would be obvious, because it'd be like, well, I'm really interested in that game, you know, really, like, I want to ask that player something because I myself would really want to know, you know, what he's thinking there in that situation, and he's so brilliant at this, I want to try and get some of that down into words, and, you know, it seems very simple to me because the basis is like, I'm so interested in the game. Now, you said earlier on, you know, I was really into League of Legends, and I want to show this side as well, the analytical side, but I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, you don't seem like a very analytical person when it comes to the actual game. It's just League of Legends inside the server. It doesn't seem like I'll give you an example, okay? I'm not super into League of Legends. I'm still gradually getting in, but I will actually sometimes think, oh, okay, this is a player that seems interesting from the results he has, okay? So now I'm going to go and watch some obscure game he played in, like LPL, with this team who's like at the bottom of the league or something.
Yeah.
I get the sense that that's not your approach. So
right.
To what degree are you actually like interested in the actual game that takes place in the server without the context of the players, etc.? And are you? I mean, I get the sense that you're never going to be the guy who's like that.
Yeah, no, that's completely true. So you're right. Like, I've never been the guy who has like a very good understanding of the raw mechanics of the game, and I've struggled to understand the things like builds or whatever, runes or whatever. Like, that's not my strength. So you're right in the sense that like I enjoy League of Legends a lot. I enjoy watching it a lot, and I enjoy sort of seeing like the rise and fall of different champions and that kind of thing. But I've never been the guy that's like, well, why is this guy going lifesteal runes? I think that there are ways to elicit, and again, I might be going off on a tangent, but feel free to afterwards bring me back on. I feel like there are ways to still get good analytical answers out of pro players and get good data without having that yourself, right? So if people look at my LCS interviews, a lot of them are like, you know, why did you lose that game, or what happened whenever it slipped away from you at this point in time? And at that point in time, that's where the pro player is going to be able to say something like, well, you know, Corki was just not like the champion that we needed for this comp. or whatever. And then at that point in time, I might ask like a follow-up question, like, well, why do you say that? And I think that, again, like, even if I don't have like the analytical knowledge or the skills, or even like the hardcore interest in knowing like the difference between like runes and how that's going to affect like late game versus mid game, or something like that. I mean, just random questions I'm throwing out there, right? As an example. I still feel like there are really good ways to get pro players to do that, because honestly, that's what the pro players talk about most of the time. You know, getting them to talk about their personal stuff is sometimes like weird for them, because they don't do that. They spend their whole time discussing, like when they're at the LCS studio, they're sitting on couches like arguing with each other about whether or not a build was a good idea when they're watching this game. So again, like I feel like I can still obtain like the good analytical information out of the players without necessarily having that myself, or being interested in knowing what the latest build is for Ezreal.
Well, when I actually referenced before the breakdown of the interviews, okay, it sounds to me like, okay, so the personality stuff usually depends on how well you know a player, right, or what their sense of humor is, because some of it is going to fall flat, like if it's a guy who doesn't speak English very well, or yeah, maybe he just doesn't understand your style of humor. So that part is like, you never know how that's going to go. Right. The in-game part also, if you don't have the analytical knowledge, again, the player has to do some of the legwork there. So it sounds to me like a reasonable way to describe your interest in League of Legends is a bit like what I was saying, okay, if the esports didn't exist, you probably wouldn't be this into League of Legends. It sounds like the context and the storylines is what you're mainly interested in. Is this because if not, then let me put it this way. If it isn't just the context, then wouldn't you be the guy who's watching all the games in Korea and all the games in China? I mean, this is the best League of Legends is played in China and Korea. I get the sense you don't watch that very much.
No, I don't watch it that much. I've been public about that. It's something that I am disappointed in myself regarding, right? Like I know that I should actually watch more Korean League of Legends, especially now in China as well, especially now that they're starting to have like the English cast for it. It's something that I've sort of made a lot of excuses about over the course of, I used to watch more of it before season 3. As season 3 came in and so much of the bread and butter of my work ended up being like North America LCS, I very much lapsed into just focusing on NA stuff, because that's where I was 2 to 3 times a week. That's the type of content that I was doing on the other 2 days a week. And so it was very easy for me to just focus on the NA stuff and not stay up until 4 in the morning watching OGN. I actually don't like watching VODs, which is another problem. I love the live stuff, and I have no idea why. I think a lot of people might be able to identify that, and a lot of people won't. But it feels like work to sometimes watch like a VOD or whatever, because I'd rather get the sense that this is happening live. So, you know, you're right in the sense that I don't watch that stuff. I don't necessarily... I'm sorry, your question was that...
Is it a contextual narrative storyline element that keeps you really interested in?
Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah. No, that is very true, right? So the stuff that makes me interested...
I mean, that's why I'm getting the sense you don't watch the Korean or Chinese, that you don't know so many of the Chinese players, and you don't have the same link in as you do if it's St. Vicious playing a game, you know?
Yeah, no, I mean, I'll admit to... Like, here's a perfect example, right? I think Europe is a less interesting scene, and I get a lot of shit from people, and I've said that publicly. I think a lot of the reason why that is just because there's not as many narratives and storylines that are happening over there. And so because of that, I am less interested, and maybe people will put me on blast for that, right? Like I see, people can't see, but you have a bit of a grin. And there's a lot of discussions. Maybe there are like really compelling storylines over there, and they need another like third-party journalist team to start telling those stories in addition to like the featurettes that Riot creates. Either way, yes, a huge drive of my interest in League of Legends esports is the storylines, right? Like, a good example of this, and I think that people can very much identify with this, a lot of people. Royal Club was like a Chinese team to me that had a decent amount of success in the past, and I knew that they had players that had been around for a long time, but overall it was like they're a Chinese team entering Worlds. And then I start talking to Tabe on Skype because a Chinese journalist friend of mine puts me in touch with him and says, hey, he might be able to do interviews with you while he's out there. And I'm like, this guy seems pretty cool. And then I do an interview with him, and I'm like, okay, this guy's really well spoken and seems pretty humble. And then by the time I do the second interview with him, and he's talking about how he's trying to win so that he can have money to propose to his girlfriend, and how he's going to be retiring after all that, Royal gets way, way more interesting to me. And that's not necessarily like, and that will always be the case for me. Like, it will never be, Royal uses this really interesting strategy. Like, that is somewhat interesting to me, right? Like, Fnatic's playstyle, for example, is interesting, like if they do something different. Or CLG EU, they play this very boring, or way back in the day when they were CLG EU, play this very boring style. And so that stuff can be kind of interesting to me, and it sometimes can be very, very interesting to me. But the stuff that will always drive my interest the most in a team or in a tournament or whatever are these storylines. Like MLG Anaheim 2012, TSM and CLG, these big rivals going into this. TSM knocks CLG down, CLG comes back, and they play this like crazy late until the night set of games to see who's going to come out on top. Like, that stuff is more interesting to me than like, oh yeah, that was whenever Double started playing, I don't know who he was playing in that tournament. Let's say, which is an example of how I am less interested in this. Oh, that was when Double started playing Urgot or something like that. Like, the big compelling things to me are always going to be the storylines and the figures and the teams. And while I will always try to provide like the game analytical stuff, and to an extent am interested in that, you're absolutely right in saying that I will always have to fight the compulsion to focus more on the team and the player and less on Manamune's viability on a certain champion.
So this actually leads directly into a question about the future, which goes like this. So if we plot the chart of Travis, okay, the number of, like, the breadth of players he gets to interview, the number of interviews he does with people, how successful interviews are, the graph's going like really high over a short span of time though. It's only a couple of years, but it's going up and up and up and up and up.
Yeah.
Now, if you were naive, you'd probably just say, well, just expand the graph infinitely. It'll keep going like that, okay? Yeah. But the problem is, from your answer here, it sounds like at the moment, there's a threshold you need to leap if you want to keep going up, okay, which goes like this. At the moment, you've almost saturated, like, in terms of just interviews, the stuff you can do in NA, okay? Yeah. You're getting nearly everyone you want to do interviews with. You're doing the type of interviews you want to do. They're getting the numbers you want. But here's the problem. When you say to me that you don't think Europe's as interesting, okay, which is just an opinion, an honest opinion, that says to me that part of how Travis gets interested in people, like I'm saying, is the context and the narrative. So if he doesn't know all the narratives and all the little weird bits of context, like for example, if he's not on the couch at EU LCS and he doesn't hear what they say to each other and stuff, he's not going to know some of the background that maybe he gets when he's at NA LCS.
Right.
How are you ever going to get that for Europe, for Korea, for China?
I think the big answer to that is when I went over to Gamescom, I started to learn more of this stuff, and I sat down next to these guys and started to get to know the players more, and started to become more interested in certain people. You know, like Deficio seems like a really cool guy. I wish I could do an interview with that guy every couple of weeks. So I think that the answer is to probably be in more general communication with these guys, and B, to hopefully attend more events and situations where I can connect with these guys. You know, like after this event, for example, if Tabe actually does retire, like he's saying, and he has implied that he's going to continue to assist Royal Club in some way, like my being able to talk to him is going to help out a lot. The connections that I made when I went to Shanghai with like a Chinese journalist or whatever, you know, we'll talk and he'll tell me some of the storylines. Alex Penn does this stuff too, where he'll sort of tell me like the crazy stuff that's happening around the scene, because he follows the Asian scene more religiously than I do, or actually way more than I do, because I've already admitted I don't as much. So I think that there are definitely ways to get the storylines and the information out there rather than actually you know, physically being there. Though I do think that it is very good if I am there. At the time, or whenever I went over to Europe and was there for Gamescom, there was a part of me that was like, I really kind of wish I could spend a split over here, because that would have been really cool, as to spend one LCS split over here, get to know all the people, get to know the storylines, come back to NA maybe, and still be able to produce content on the EU stuff. That being said, I don't think that, like, there's only one of me, right? Like, so as the scene grows, I actually really think it's going to be harder for people to not specialize in one region. Like, my hands down, my specialty now with NA LCS is, and how I cover over here, is North America. I think that it'll always be hard for me to like you're right in the sense that I won't be able to just like keep growing like this at the same rate because I can't cover NA LCS and EU LCS and be embedded in Asia all at once. So it's always going to have to be a decision for me, which is the scene that I'm going to do most of my content with and where I'm going to follow the most storylines and where I'm going to be most interested. And right now that's North America because I live in Santa Monica and the studio is there.
So when you said before you don't like to watch VODs and you want to experience things live as they're happening.
Yeah.
Now, it's actually true that if for anyone who's ever worked in esports, okay, sometimes you'd think to yourself, if you didn't cover a specific event, you think, oh, I'll go back and watch that later.
Yeah.
But I know a lot of people, they never get around to doing that because the next event's happening, okay. Whereas, so there's a degree to which actually being forced to cover it live sort of embeds it in your mind. And like, you remember the order things happened in and why that, you know the context automatically, okay. But isn't it like a core component of journalism just as an abstract philosophy and a way of doing a certain job, a journalist's job, to do research, to go back, to try and dig into things? It sounds like that's like, you have to force yourself to do that to a degree. Is this true?
Yeah. No, I agree. I agree a lot. I will say, like, I will say that to an extent I disagree. So the community gives me a lot of love, and I appreciate that. That's really cool. They'll say stuff like best interviewer in a fan will come by and say that to me at an event, you know. It was just a great compliment, and I'm honored by it, and I'm happy that they enjoy my content. I disagree with that statement. Like, I don't think that I am like the best interviewer. I think that I have so much more work to do and so much more to grow on. I think that, like, I look at industry figures that have been around for a long time, like yourself and Slasher and others, and I think like there's a lot to learn there. And I'm not just saying that because you're interviewing me, and I'm not just saying that to try and sound humble. Like, literally, I very frequently feel as though I have a lot more that I need to learn and a lot more to grow on. And I think that's probably a pretty reasonable answer, considering, like you've pointed out, like I've only been doing this, or as I pointed out, we've discussed, I've only been doing this for barely over 2 years, and full-time less than that, and actually learning how to like grow the craft and that kind of thing. Like, probably the most growth that I've had and trying to figure this stuff out is in the past year. So you're right that there's a lot more for me to do and a lot more for me to grow on. I'm really looking forward to doing that. You specifically, this is fun because in an interview with you, I get to just reference you as a person, but you specifically are someone who I look to and I'm like, that guy does like crazy research. You know, like, you can do stuff in multiple games. I can't. Slasher's the same way. Like, he can do stuff in multiple games to varying degrees of success. And a lot of that comes from your guys' ability to do research. I wanted to do a lot of research going into Worlds, and just because of scheduling and things that were happening in my personal life, I did not do nearly the amount of research that I should do or wanted to do going into it on the teams. And thus, I feel like my interviews with specifically the Asian teams are very much handicapped by my lack of research and knowledge. And like, I'm very disappointed, for example, in any interview that I do with a Korean team or whatever, because I feel as though like there's so many better questions I could be asking than like the generic ones I ask. So going forward, like, you're right in the sense that it'll be hard for me to like have the continued growth that I've had in terms of getting to do like good interviews with different players and that kind of thing. But as a journalist, like I still feel like there's a lot of stuff that I can learn in terms of like research and how to do research, when to do research, what type of research to do, like what VODs should I watch, if I'm going to watch VODs, should I read like summaries on websites or that kind of thing. And so yeah, research is definitely an area that I'm looking to and something I need to do.
So I think this actually hints at a side of yourself I haven't seen you address, okay? It goes like this. Most people who do your style of stuff, okay, which is known for either the drama or the big headline or like a Doublelift saying some crazy shit, okay? Most people like that, other people in the industry will, even if they like them, they'll say, okay, he's like the popcorn blockbuster guy, you know. He does like the big movie that gets all the gross, but it's not like the serious art and something. That's how they'll categorize them, okay? Yeah. The thing is, that sort of a person, even a tabloid journalist type person, they're usually actually very shameless. Like, they don't think to themselves, well, I don't have to adhere to like some artistic idea. Like, I get the most numbers, like I'm doing what I want to do, I'm getting the interview I want. So like, fuck you guys, I love what I'm doing. I don't care what you do. In fact, you're just bitter because, you know, you do these things over over here. So usually if they were to say, no, I wish I was more like you, they'd probably be lying, okay? They'd probably be trying to be fake humble.
Right.
But from your answers and from the way I've seen you interact with the community before, it actually sounds like you almost feel like you don't want to just take like the easy route and have all the success just from these style of interviews now. Part of you wants to like be respected as the serious journalist as well, and you want like the street cred of like, no, I did do my research for that and I did do this, and you want it to be like, it's almost like when I say it's an insecurity, I don't mean it's like a bad thing. I mean it's like it's like you feel that like you don't want people to just say, oh, I love what you do and it's just over here in this box here. You want to really believe that you could do it all. Like, is this true?
Yeah, that's very true. So here's an example, right? I did a series of interviews, like 5 or 6 of them or something like that, that were long form lunch interviews, right? Which is kind of a funny thing because we would talk about like, so basically the idea was I grabbed lunch with a pro player and we talked for 45 minutes, hour and 15, very similar to like the time length of your grilled interviews. And while it was kind of casual in the sense that we're just sitting there eating a sandwich or something like that, it still allowed for me to do a lot more probing, interesting questions into like the past of the player, like kind of thing. Still based around, a lot of the questions still based around the personality of the player, but still like, in my mind, very informative. Like maybe in a different way than the grilled ones, but still informative. And then LCS started and I just sort of like lapsed into the weekly LCS interviews because it was like, that was just sort of like what I was learning to do and like the habit I was getting into, and just sort of became like what I was developing, right? So in the meantime, on Reddit, I noticed a growing sentiment of people that would say, oh, you know, Travis's interviews are cool and I enjoy watching them, but Thorin, for example, does these grilled interviews which are way more informative. In my mind, I'm always thinking, okay, well, I did like a 60-minute interview with this person and Thorin did like a well-researched like hour-long interview where he had like an outline or just had thought more about it rather than like, oh, that game just finished, let me grab the player and start asking them questions about it. And so like during the off season that's coming up, one of the things I would like to do is do a return to those kind of like lunch style interviews where they're longer form or more informative or whatever. People will inevitably say that I'm ripping off Grilled, and I apologize if I am, but I still would rather do like a cool long form interview, and it'll probably be in my own style and maybe more about the personality of the player or something like that. But I want to do that stuff because it drives me crazy that people think I'm incapable of it. You mentioned it as an insecurity and like the fact that I kind of want to do this stuff, and like, I don't know, maybe it's like just as a personality, I don't want to ever be thought of as just like this guy that can only do this one thing. Like I generally speaking, I like to consider myself as multi-talented or whatever as a person, and so yeah, like I want to show people that I can do that other stuff too.
Does Travis do interviews because in any sense he wants to be famous?
Okay, this is a fun question. This is a fun question because I think that there are like a lot of different ways at looking at it, and it's a conversation I've had about a lot of things. I think that it is very hard to become successful in the esports industry if you walk into it with the sentiment of I want to be famous. Like, if that is your driving force for doing something, I don't see you becoming successful. I've seen a lot of, like, that's based on, like, seeing a lot of people have that for 2.5 years. In fact, they'll mask it. They'll say, oh, you know, I want to do it because I want to do it for the community, or I want to do it because I'm super passionate about this. But, like, you can always kind of tell when they're pushing to try and become more famous or whatever. So, that being said, I think that if I only had the attitude of I want to be famous, that I would have never succeeded. And I think that, and very, very, very much will say that the initial reason for forming SotL League, for creating esports content, for all that stuff, was never to be famous. Like, it was, in my mind, like going to be a hobby, like a blog or something like that. It was never going to be a career. I thought maybe I'd start this podcast. In fact, in my mind, I thought it'll be like the journal that everybody starts where they have 3 entries and then it never goes anywhere else. So the sentiment was never like, oh, this is something that I can use to make me famous. That being said, hands down, I feel like everyone in this industry who is on camera has some sort of extent of being a prima donna and enjoys the attention. Maybe not everyone. I should be careful with gross generalizations, but a lot of people are down to ham it up. For me specifically, yeah, there's a degree of hey, it's kind of cool to... Here's a good example. I just brought my dad to Galen for semifinals, for the first day of the semifinals. It was his first esports event. He didn't really understand it. He is a big fan of MLB and traditional baseball and traditional sports. And he knew that I sort of did the stuff. I had sort of said, you know, I have a following, people asking me for autographs and that kind of thing. But I wanted to show him not only the event itself so that he could sort of get an idea for like what an esports event looks like, so he can visualize it when I say I'm going to Germany or wherever, but also because I kind of wanted him to see, like, one, what I do, because it's kind of hard to explain. People in esports who do this job and have family members that like don't follow esports can probably identify with this whole sentiment of like, it's hard to explain what I do. I have people in my family that still say, how's that commentary going? Well, you do like the play-by-play casting, and I tell them every single time at an event or like at a holiday, that's not the case. So anyway, I bring my dad, but there is a degree of, it'll be so cool whenever my dad sees people ask me for autographs. And we walk and get lunch and walk up to the hotel, and these 4 dudes get out of a car and they turn around and they're like, oh my gosh, it's Travis, Travis, oh thank you, can we get a picture? That's so cool. And like, first off, I legitimately mean this, like I am always really sort of humbled by that kind of thing, which is a weird thing to say. I've always felt like it's strange when people say they're humbled by like how like much a fan will say something, because it sounds kind of like a contradiction or whatever, but like it still is. It's just like a strange feeling. So it's not like I'm like, oh yes, bring on the fans, I'm famous, you know, like I very much appreciate these people. I would not be here if it wasn't for them being interested and invested in my content. But yeah, like if you want to ask me, does any part of Travis do this stuff because he wants to be famous? Like that is a perk of the job, and that's part of the cool things. One of the cool part of the things, or the list of things that make me enjoy it, and part of the reason why I keep doing it. If I wasn't famous, if I, let's say, what's that game that the original Call of Duty people are making right now, that Titanfall. Let's say Titanfall comes out and nobody fucking knows who I am, and I'm really passionate about this game and I want to go do it. Like, and maybe I'm bored by League by that point. It's hard for me to envision like a situation in which I would be, right? But I would go do that if I was really passionate in the content, and even if I didn't feel like I was going to be famous. Like if people weren't going to be interested in, or I'm not already famous in that. So it's definitely in no means like the huge driving force, but I feel like for a lot of people, for a lot of personalities, for a lot of people that are on camera, if they say like that they don't enjoy being famous, or part of the reason why they do it isn't about the fact that like they're internet famous or they have fans or they have attention, like they're trying to sort of be, they're just trying to seem way cooler than necessarily they are. And so that's my general thing. I mean, that's not necessarily all people, but I think like, yeah, most people really enjoy that.
Whenever I look at your style of how you answer people on Reddit, either you give off the perception or you actually are worried to some degree how people perceive you, okay? Because if you ever see the way I talk to people on Reddit, okay, if someone was to say to me something like, I didn't like how long this interview was, you'll probably never see me answer that. And if I was to answer it, it'd probably be something like, you probably shouldn't watch this interview then.
Yeah.
If Travis, someone said something like that to Travis, he would say like, well, I'm working on a new format, you know, I'll see if I can get it a bit more, you know, you'd sort of try to negotiate with the person. Like, you know, I'm trying to do this stuff for you guys. Like, tell me what you want. Maybe I can work it in there.
Yeah.
Like, is this accurate in terms of your relationship with your public?
Yeah, that's 100% accurate. I will say, like, with Reddit specifically, it's about the stuff that gets upvoted, right? So like if something is buried in downvotes, I want to address it, because as much as Reddit tries to dictate that stuff that gets downvoted is not about, rather it's about relevancy or something like that, it's definitely downvoted about opinion, right? So if it seems like the general consensus is like, oh, you know, somebody says like, I didn't like the way the translations were done in this interview, and it gets downvoted like crazy, then that's something that I will probably disregard, because it doesn't seem like there's a really strong feeling about that. if there are several comments or a lot of them are upvoted, then yeah, that's something I will take into consideration. As I've already addressed previously, one of the reasons why I do the Doublelift interviews is because people really like that. And for me, I want to do the content that people want. I want to find like a mutual like place where I can do the stuff that I like, but present it in a way or do it in a way that people can enjoy it in. Like whether that be like the format or something like that. And so, yeah, like I do care what people think. And I think a lot of people say, oh, you shouldn't care what people think. People specifically will say, hey, ignore Reddit. Like fans will come up to me and say, hey, your stuff is great. Don't care what, or you should disregard what they say on Reddit or whatever. But no, yeah, I definitely care about that stuff. Like if I disregard everything that everybody says on Reddit, you know, like what, my content will never be 100% content I'm doing because it's the content I want to do. It'll also be content that I'm doing for people who support me. Because again, I've already said like for me specifically, I made a jump out of a career into like nowhere based on a couple of job offers in esports that eventually fell through. People literally supported me by like sending me money or sending me money to go to Korea. Like for a lot of me feels like I owe the community and these people like stuff that they want, you know, content that they want to see and will forever. Like there's been I shouldn't even reference this because I don't know the situation, right? But I just know that I've heard that there is a sentiment that Fatality, for example, like got a lot of money and then just sort of like didn't really bring that back to the community. Like not necessarily, okay. And like didn't do a lot.
Yeah.
Like I think of that. As soon as I heard that, I've sort of carried that with me because I definitely don't want that. I want to somehow return that around. Like if somehow like Doublelift interviews suddenly got crazy CPM and I was making like hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? Like a lot of, I'd probably try and throw some of that money into amateur tournaments, or I'd probably try to fly like amateur journalists to an event or sponsor them or something like that. Like I want to return what I feel is something that the community has given me back to them. So yeah, whenever I see like a top comment that's like, this interview was really boring, I'm going to look at it and be like, okay, why was it boring? Was it me? Was it the player? Did I not ask good questions to bring the player out? Like, is it just always going to be like this because the topic matter is going to be boring? And do I need to keep doing that? If, you know, like, do I want to do this content? Is it important enough to me personally that I value it enough that I will just continue to get the question or the statements, this is really boring, and do I disregard that? Or do I take into account like the community sentiment on it and try to change it? Like, do I just do less of these interviews but still do them because I want to do them? Like, there's a ton of thoughts that go through my mind whenever it feels like there's a community sentiment against me.
If Travis wanted to be employed by Riot, he either could be or he already could have been.
I mean, that's not a question. Are you asking if that's true?
It's a statement. You told me.
Yeah. I think it's true. It's hard for me to say. Because my discussions with Riot have never been like I've never gotten a formal job offer from Riot.
As a hypothetical, then.
Oh, as a hypothetical.
Based on the if we recreate it as a simulation, the world as it is now, but because it's inside a computer, Riot won't be mad about what happens because it's just the Sims version of the world. In that world, everything's the same as in our world now. It's sort of like the Matrix. In that world, Travis either could have been hired by Riot as some sort of official interviewer, or he could be if he wanted to be. What do you think in the simulation only Riot?
Yeah, no, it's fine. I don't know if I could have been hired as an interviewer. I think right now, but I think I could have been hired from Riot. I think right now, let's say GameSpot's like, hey, we're not interested in esports content. YouTube CPMs die. Other content people aren't as interested in that stuff. And I'm just like, hey, I can't keep affording to do this. I went to Riot and was like, hey guys, like, I can't do this anymore. Like, do you guys have any job openings or something like that? I legitimately think that they would find something for me. I can't state with 100% certainty, but I feel like I could. I have a pretty decent relationship with them. I feel like I have a pretty good experience, that would qualify me for it. And yeah, I generally feel like that would happen. But it's pretty irrelevant at this point because both Riot and our general feelings is that I am more valuable outside of Riot than I would be inside of Riot.
One of the strange things about the esports industry is that it's in no way a meritocracy. So the closest it comes is that if someone gets a lot of hits, then in theory they should always in some way be able to get like someone they can work for, or and that's one of the few areas where you can put numbers down and people will definitely value them okay. But in terms of how good something is, the people who do the best stuff aren't necessarily paid the most or given the most stuff behind the scenes, regardless of what fans might think okay. And so the big problem with that is in terms of contrasted against real journalism in the real world, like political journalism or something, is that if you're incredible in political journalism, okay, you can get paid top dollar to be the best at writing in that field, or say you're long tenure, you're a veteran, you can get paid for that status of being a veteran and the fact that everyone else in the industry respects you, and so they give you this awesome job. The only sense that you can sort of have a meritocracy in esports is that depending on how high up a hierarchy you go, you can get more money, obviously. If you become like... So the problem with this, I've noticed over the years when I've seen other journalists, is that it actually forces people who are best suited to content roles out of content. So think of it like this. In real journalism, okay, if you become the editor of a newspaper, like the editor-in-chief, you become that after like 25 years of doing your beat and becoming that. So at that point, it's true, you probably are like an old guy and you wouldn't be suited to go out there and pound the streets and get the stories. So it's not a problem that you then don't write anymore. You just edit other people's work and you tell them what to write. The problem is, if in esports, if you just try to go up the hierarchy, you would get to that stage within like 2 years. And so within that point, someone will offer you a job like, okay, you can run our content division, okay. So now we want you to take less focus on your work and, develop these guys and run the overall thing. And so the problem is, someone who's very good at this one thing they do is going to then get on a job offer, and I've seen this happen over and over, where they're going to take the job offer because they want more money because there's not that much money in being a content provider, okay. And they're going to move away from doing what we all really want them to do, okay. So the reason I ask this question is because at the moment, you've hit the peak of what you can do. And if you do more, like whatever you're going to expand into now, or if you're going to somehow increase things more, unless what you do at the moment can just somehow double in hits or something, it seems like there's a threshold at the moment where you'd either be like breaking new ground or you'd have to figure out some new way to do something. So the question goes like this. Like, how do you actually go forwards from here without just like treading water? Like, where do you really go? Like, are you just going to always be just doing these interviews? That's going to be your core thing?
So is the question like in terms of career growth? Where do I go from here? Okay. So
even in the short term, like the next 6 months, next year, next 2 years.
Oh yeah. Okay, that's a really good conversation to have. Because like this is the reason why like I actually really think this is interesting is because I will be hanging out with friends or whatever, writers, even somebody, that are in a more traditional career path where it's like, hey, where do you want to get to? Like maybe a guy that starts working in customer service, player support at Riot Games wants to eventually get over to like the production side and become like a senior producer and become a senior producer on a game that Riot might make like 10 years down the line, right? So people around me will be having this conversation and it's like, okay, so then how does that apply to me? Like, is my plan to become like an editor-in-chief or run a content thing? Or am I going to, like, I don't know, technically, like, so he's not my boss, right? But Kim Rom is now the VP of esports at CBS Interactive. Like, presumably that's a path that I could get to at some point in time where I'm able to help run like a content business side of this stuff if I get enough knowledge of it down the road. Is that like the direction I want to go? And do I want to stop doing content? So my answer to people has always been like, I could really see myself doing this. I say this now. I say this as 24-year-old Travis who's been doing this for 2.5 years. And I make no guarantee that I will say this 6 months from now or 6 years from now. But for now, I could see myself doing this for as long as my career goes. And just trying to up the production levels and trying to become a better interviewer and a better journalist and a better content creator and just continue to do like make better content for people, because in no way is like the silly simple interviews that I do now that don't have any B-roll footage over them or like just are like, especially before I started working with GameSpot and the stuff that I do besides them, in no way is that like the pinnacle of content, right? And production value. So yeah, I could see myself continuing to do this stuff and raise that, right? So where do I go from here? 6 months from now, I'd like to be doing better interviews, like asking better questions, be able to break news better than I do. I've only experimented with a couple times. I'm looking to somebody like Slasher, who tends to do it more often, to do that. Have better research and that kind of thing. Somebody like I look to you for, have a better presentation on camera, which is something I look to Sjokz to. Like generally just upgrade the level of all the content that I'm creating. And then like as a career path, my hope would be that like at this point in time, like the question becomes, you know, well, where's esports going to go? Because the cap that I will hit, like what you're referencing is the fact that like it's hard to, like in a regular news anchor journalism, like you can end up hosting like a nightly show on NBC or something like that. You can't do that here, but maybe someday you can. Maybe not like host a show on television, right? But like a similar path where like there continues to be like another stair that's built into this set of stairs, or another rung on the ladder. So my hope is that by continuing to follow this path of improving my content, that I will be able to raise myself to a place where you know, I'm seeing an increase in financial compensation and like personal feelings of satisfaction for the growth that I'm taking, and it's not feeling like I'm just sort of sitting here stagnant in the same place I was for years. My hope is that if I end up sitting here stagnant and doing like the same old stuff and creating like the same content, I don't feel like there's much growth and it doesn't feel like the esports scene is growing, then yeah, like that's probably when I'm like, what would it be like to manage a team? Or what would it be like to work on the sponsor side of things and like have a relationship with these organizations and tournaments and all that kind of stuff? And maybe that's when I try something else. But I'm holding out right now, at least my general sentiment is that I'm going to hold out and hope that esports continues to grow and allow for me to feel like I'm growing along with it professionally.
So you mentioned esports there mainly. You didn't say League of Legends, right? So the obvious question that I'm going to ask you goes like this: when League of Legends dies, notice I didn't say if there, yeah. I said when. So when League of Legends dies, whether you think now, oh, I'll definitely continue. I'll just preface this like this, okay? Every pro, almost, throughout the 10 years or more that I've covered games, yeah. When they asked, what will you do when you retire? They always say, oh, well, I'll definitely stay around esports. You know, I'll probably become a commentator or a manager. Probably 99.9% of them disappear and never heard from ever again. Right. Because either they can't transition to that, or when it comes to a new game, they realize, like, I actually don't really care about this game, so I think I'm just going to peace out, guys. For the same reason you come into it because you're interested, it's very easy to leave if you're not interested, okay? It's actually quite rare that people do transition over and over. Do your experiences so far suggest to you that you'll be able to like uproot from League of Legends when it's dead at this point as an esport? Maybe the game will exist, but as an esport, eventually one day it will be succeeded by something, or something will take its spot. Will you be able to plug into that new game? Do you get this sense that you're going to do that? You're going to be Travis, but in the new game?
Possibly. Like you referenced the fact that pros tend to have a hard time transitioning beyond like the game that they excelled at. And that's completely true. I think it's a lot less of a danger for somebody that does something that I do. And I think you're an example of that, right? Like you've been around for a long time, Slasher as well, DJ Wheat, like these guys have covered a lot of stuff. And I think that there's pretty good evidence that if you have a skill set that extends beyond just being able to be good at a video game, that you will continue to do that. Watching Doublelift at the analyst desk, for example, makes me a lot less concerned for him after he decides to retire, because I feel like he's going to be able to transition out in a lot of places that other pros can't. And like I said, for somebody that's in my career, I feel like you can definitely do that. League, by the way, I just want to say, like, I have no idea when League is going to die. I expect it to go away or get replaced, because that seems to happen in every game. I expect it, though, to live longer than, I guess, Brood War might be one of the examples of an extremely long-standing one. It's hard to say, like, I mean, CS has still got stuff, right? But I don't know. So I expect it to live for a long time. Maybe I will live with it for that entire duration, maybe I will get tired, or it'll get morphed into something else, or like there's a possibility, and I'll just say like that Riot could decide that they want to produce a ton of content in-house. Snoopy could retire at the end of season 3. Riot could hire him. He could start doing interviews. He has a much bigger following than me. People might start to be less interested in my stuff because maybe I can't meet the production values that Riot does. Maybe I'm not doing this stuff with League by the end of 2014. That would be really, really sad. And I hope that's not the case. And I don't necessarily think that that's like the plan that Riot has. But yeah, there's like a huge possibility that I might have to transition away from League next year or 10 years from now.
Okay, so actually in that scenario, this hypothetical of Snoopy becoming the new hot interviewer, the idea is you wouldn't leave esports, you'd actually try your hand at another esport.
Yes, yeah. So I actually like, and here's why, right? Like we had this discussion earlier around like what I'm passionate about and what makes me decide to do the content and that kind of thing. I love League of Legends. I actually legitimately love League of Legends. I think it's super fun to watch, and like some games are like admittedly extremely boring to watch, but like there are a lot of games that are really fun. The semifinals ones, for example, fantastic. As a spectator, it's just super enjoyable. It doesn't even matter if I care about whether or not like Ezreal decided to go this like weird item build or whatever. Like it might be interesting to me, but the excitement is actually just sitting there as a spectator watching this. That being said, like I definitely feel like there's the potential to do other stuff. A big part of this was when I went to TI3. I don't really care much for Dota at this time. I played Dota All-Stars, and I'm not a huge fan of Dota 2. I don't enjoy it as much as League of Legends, and I've been vocal about that, so I'm not like scared about saying that here. But TI3 taught me a couple things. One is I can still feel the excitement that I feel watching certain League of Legends matches in other games. Like at least in MOBAs. I mean, I enjoyed this stuff in StarCraft too, or Arts. I'm sorry, since we're talking about Dota 2. The finals for Dota 2 were really cool. I enjoyed Alliance and Navi, and I picked up on their storylines with knowing very little about them over the course of the couple days that I was there. And while being there, talking to the different content creators that were there and like the people that run the studios, I realized like there is like no one who's really doing what I do in Dota 2. Like at least this is what they've told me. Maybe I've missed someone. And so the realization for me is like, if I got forced out of League or just started to be more interested in Dota 2, maybe I suddenly subscribe to like the sentiment that others subscribe, that it's like the game with more depth. I don't know. I mean, personalities and attitudes change towards games. Like I suspect that there'd be a lot of people that would be like, Travis bashed on Dota 2 in the past and now he's doing it, he's a fraud. But maybe honestly I would enjoy Dota 2 at a certain point in time over League of Legends. I don't foresee it, but maybe. And so what I'm getting at is that TI3 taught me that I could probably do Dota 2 stuff like 2 months from now and people would enjoy it, and I could start to learn it and start to learn the storylines and have a good time with it. I also think, all that being said, I also think that, like I mentioned previously, like even if I could not do the journalism thing or like the content just did not catch on, like there's a possibility for me to go do something with a sponsor or someplace else in the esports industry, and I freaking love esports. Not just like in that whole like cheesy esports is awesome way, but like there are so many components of this industry that are so cool. Like the people in it just tend to be extremely unique individuals that I value a lot and enjoy working with, like it's just really a cool place to be. And so like worst case scenario in my mind is like, okay, there's no game that I'm interested in necessarily, like that I'm as passionate about as in League of Legends, and I for some reason can't keep doing League of Legends content. So maybe I go and work with like a sponsor. Derek Trung is a guy who used to be a professional CS player, I believe, and now he works for iBuyPower and does stuff with Tastosis and sponsors different League of Legends teams and does stuff with the Dota 2 studio, and that I think could be really fun. Again, I still plan on doing like the content stuff for the foreseeable future, but whenever we talk about weird case scenarios where like I'm not able to do what I want to do, I think there's a lot of places where I could also have a lot of fun.
You once made a comment, I believe it was on Reddit, that had a really strange way of describing something. Okay, someone asked you something along the lines of like, they were talking about some of the people who had been on Whose League Is It Anyway, I think.
Yeah.
Or maybe it was like one of those generic threads that come up every few months, like, how do I get into esports journalism or something, or, you know, like, or into the esports industry. And so everyone always gives people the same advice, you know, like, oh, do this, do that, like, get your name out there, send your CV, you know, all the standard stuff.
Yeah.
And so you made this point that, like, you know, if you're good and if you're a positive influence, you know, there are people in the industry like me who, talking about yourself, obviously not me, people like me who will help you and, you know, will give you a leg up like this person did. And, you know, this person we thought was good. And so we helped them with contacts and we brought this person onto our show. But then what people didn't seem to notice was then suddenly it went fucking dark instantly. Because then you said as a follow-up statement, but on the other hand, if I think you're a toxic presence or you're going to be bad for the industry, I will block you and I will make sure you don't get far in this industry. You actually said words almost exactly to that effect. I'm not even like dramatizing it here. Like, what did you mean by both sides of those statements?
Yeah. Okay. So both sides. Let's start with the light side. I firmly believe that, like, okay, so as I mentioned previously, like, I really want to give back to the community. That's not just necessarily to people that are like community members or fans, but also to help people get up. I would not be here without Doublelift, and without not just Doublelift, but like there's a whole army of people that have supported me getting to the place I am. I owe a lot to Slasher, for instance. You know, certain people within Riot have been helpful to me and supportive of my cause. Like, there's just a lot of people that have been helpful, and so I try to bring that back. I also, okay, so in early 2012, I started to face competition for the first time in League of Legends. Pluto was coming up, Monte Cristo was starting to do stuff. Sjokz started working with SK and doing content, and I started to feel insecure. Like, at the time, I didn't have a steady source of income. I was like trying to find, I didn't feel like established where I was like sure that I'd be able to pay rent every single month. And so I'm like, dear God, what happens if one of these people comes up and starts kicking my ass, or the community just decides like, oh, pretty girl like Sjokz, who is admittedly very talented, but at the time I didn't know that, is going to be far more fascinating than like Travis, who I didn't look as good back then. Not that I look very good now, but I was just paranoid. Started to realize like, wait, actually, if I just help people, like, a bunch of cool things happens. One is the scene gets cooler and better because there's like other people, you know, like people might not, there were a lot of people who loved Pluto's content over mine. I actually kind of miss him in the scene, not only because he's my friend, but also because people who didn't like my content had like this alternative that produced a lot of content and they could go do his stuff and then they wouldn't necessarily trash on me, and that was nice and relieving. And I got to watch his content and that was cool too. So like that was cool. Another thing was I started to look at like these old boys clubs of people that like were all buddies, you know, like this was a concept in StarCraft for a while of just like these dudes that, you know, it was hard to get into the industry because these old boys, the old boys club would sort of like all stick together, like JP and Day9 and TJ Wade. I think those were names that were thrown around as being in this, right? And I didn't necessarily agree with it as a huge problem. Because I didn't necessarily feel like the conclusion there was it's hard to get into the industry because these guys won't let you. I felt like the fact that they did this stuff together made all of them create even better content and helped the industry a lot. Like, people working together generally is better as for the industry, as long as people, like the people that are working together, have like a good mindset about that kind of thing. So anyway, the funny thing, there was a sign that was like at semis that was like King Travis of GameSpot, everything he touches turns pro. God, it's so arrogant of me to like bring that up and talk about it, and so full of myself. But you know, I did. And part of the reason I laugh at that is because I don't think it's necessarily because of me at all. That like Alex Penn is now the analyst for Cloud9. Sjokz is the host for LCS. Nick Allen is now a very, very important person in Riot Esports. But I do think that it's pretty cool that we were all on the show together like a year ago doing this stuff, and I've seen them grow since then. And so generally speaking, like, I think it's really cool to identify people that are doing really good stuff in the scene, need more exposure, and try to give them that exposure. These guys might have all gotten to the same place regardless of my show ever happening, or like I could have never talked to them and they could be where they are now. Maybe I talked to them and they got to where they are faster. Maybe they wouldn't be where they are. I think they probably would. But it's really cool that I was able to work with them and help them and get to a good place. And because of that, they're cool with me. They got to a cool place. Like, everything is good, right? That there's no bad that came out of that. It's not like, oh, I'm fucked because Nick Allen started doing work at Riot Games. Like, if I had never, yeah, it's just, it's good. On the other side of that, there's a lot of people that try to get into the scene, and sometimes I misidentify them. I've been wrong about people before. I recently had a situation where somebody who I had disliked intently for a long time and felt was kind of like a douche, I actually sat down and was like, no, this person's cool, and got into a good place with them. And so that was like a lesson for me in like being very careful about my assumptions about people. But there are a lot of people that do stuff because they either just want to like make money or get famous or whatever, and I don't feel like they have the best intentions, or they want to like rip people apart that I think are good for the scene, or generally just have like a bad influence in this area. Not everyone has this attitude, but I have this attitude, and others do. Some others do. Like, we're all trying to, there's a big sense like amongst a lot of people of like, hey, we're trying to like make this thing legitimate. We're trying to grow the industry. We're trying to work together. And so I think that whenever people identify people that are not doing that, or are working against it, or generally just dicks to everyone and don't want to work with anybody, like, they're not going to work with that person. And in some cases, like me, if somebody's like, I'm not even gonna use a name because people might think that it means a name. I was gonna be like Joe or Brad or something, and people will find someone like, they'll be like, oh, he's talking about Joe Miller or Brad or something. But person A is being a jerk to everybody and produces like okay content, but like generally speaking just tries to undermine people, spreads rumors, like does bad things for the scene. And I hear person A is gonna try to get a job at Machinima. I might be like, hey, just a heads up, I've had like a rough dealing with this guy. Like, I would be careful about talking to him. Like, you should look out. And I think other people will do to that too, which is why it's so important to like not burn bridges and not be a dick, which is one of the things that I wrote about. And what I think you're referencing is an article that I wrote just as sort of like a freelance thing for RTS Guru, okay, on like how to get into the industry. And so that's one of the reasons I put it in there, is because like I feel like a lot of people come in and like, you know, I love Sean and it's cool and he's a very positive person, day 9. And like I remember he wrote a very similar one that was like very positive. But I think it's important to also warn people like, hey, don't be a dick, because that's not going to help you. And a lot of people feel like that's like the cool way to get ahead, or just like not show respect. I don't know why they do it, but like, yeah, like I will probably be like, yo, Riot, don't hire that person. Just my personal opinion. I think that they will probably be awful, or Machinima or whoever, like, or like a sponsor. This has happened to me before. This has actually happened to me before. A sponsor came to me and said, hey, we were thinking about sponsoring X. I won't say what. Should we do that? And I said, I would be very hesitant to do that because this person is involved in it, and that person has been known to be awful and will possibly be very bad for your brand. And I think that that might have had some effect on the sponsor's decision to sponsor or not to sponsor something. I guess there's a lot of discussion that can occur around whether or not that was a good thing that I did that, or if I should just be like, none of my business, you know what, that thing is okay, go do that. But I firmly believe that it's important for people to spread the word whenever somebody's a dick, so that they don't end up fucking up other stuff.
Can you understand if you go into a observational mode, even observing yourself, so you create a little bit of distance and you're just going to try and think without emotional context here, can you understand why someone could say, I don't dislike Travis as a person, but I don't like his interviews. Can you understand, and does that have a place in the world, or do they just misunderstand you and they would be into your interviews if it was different, if they understood them more, or what do you think?
No, 100% I understand that people won't, like, okay, how many people watch League of Legends content? Like, so many people. I can't think of a number because there's so many different numbers. It is really ridiculous to think that 100% of those people will like my content and enjoy them. I mean, and that's sort of what I referenced earlier when I said, like, it was kind of nice having Pluto around or other interviewers. Like right now, there kind of needs to be some more, because there was a place for those people that don't like my content. There's like, maybe people don't give a shit about the storylines or about the personalities or the players, and they are strictly interested in what team has the best mechanics, why they have those mechanics, why they have the best strategies, and how that allows them to win. My content will never serve that person if that's the only thing they're interested in, at least not entirely. Like, maybe they'll be able to glean a little bit, but that's definitely not what my strength is. So yeah, like, that person shouldn't, like, first off, maybe they also won't like me as a person, because that tends to be how that stuff goes. But yeah, like, they probably won't like my content, and that's not a big deal. Like, there's a lot of people in the industry even that, like, don't watch my interviews and don't find them compelling, and I can understand why. Like, I never make the assumption like, oh, did you see that Doublelift interview? You didn't? What the hell? You don't like my interviews? Yeah, like, that's foolish. So no, there's like, yeah, no one. I am lucky if a majority of people that watch League of Legends content like my content.
Whenever I end, and I always at the end of these interviews try to get some sort of hypothetical scenario.
Yeah.
It's nearly always usually about players and picking an all-star team, okay?
Right.
So I have to do something different for you.
Nice.
So what I'm going to do is, this is going to be a really unique one, okay?
Yeah.
Most people will only know other esports figures by either their writing or their on-screen persona, okay? And the problem with that is they can then craft whatever they want. They can be I could give you an example. Someone like Too Good, he comes off very cool and very suave. If you actually know him at all as a person or his background, there's elements of that, but he's exaggerated them, okay?
Yeah.
For effect.
That was my experience as well.
Okay, so
Too Good.
Since you have experience with some of these people behind the scenes, what I want you to do is to give people an idea at home. I'll list a couple of people, okay? And for each person I list, you're going to reference a League of Legends player who is like that person. So you can go two routes. Either you can reference like their style of play is like that person, to maybe reference something about the person, or just their personalities like that person. So this is because people are going to know the personalities and styles of the players.
Yeah.
So that's your reference point. So we're going to start off, and we're going to start with Travis.
Okay, so really quickly, just so I understand, because this is like a next level question. I really like this, it's funny, but it's like next level. So the idea is I'm supposed to identify myself with either another player.
No, with a player, but either their personality fits yours, and that's what you're referencing, okay, or their style of play in some way references some element.
Do I say whether or not it's their style of play or their personality, or do I just leave that for guess?
Give the reason why, so in doing so you'll do that. Just so you have another option if you want to do it.
All right, so this is going to be one of those times where, like, for the first time in this interview, where I'm like looking introspective, and maybe you edit it. So maybe this is like your edit point. But a style of play or a personality.
Like whichever's easiest.
For myself, that's like the hardest one.
You want to? Let's do that last then, okay? I'll come back to that one. Yeah. So we'll start off with Slasher then. Which player in League of Legends? Because actually not that many people in League of Legends will know Slasher that much. Right. So which player in League of Legends is Slasher, either personality wise or as a player, and then whatever you can do whatever you want for the player, their success or what they're like as a player or how terrible they are, whatever the person you're going with is.
I need to go to style of play because personalities are too hard for Slasher.
A way to get into it, okay, as an in point, while you're thinking of the names, what I usually suggest on similar questions for other people, I'll tell them to like pick out the few qualities that's coming to mind when you think of the person, and then from that maybe that'll suggest a player,
Yeah.
So what were the things for Slasher that's going to come to mind, and then you can maybe link it to the player,
Okay, so Slasher, dear God, somehow this will get linked to him. Slasher is very, very persistent. He's very smart. He is very social. So persistent, smart, and social. I'll say Crepo. Crepo from personality.
I'm sure Crepo's gonna love that.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sorry, Crepo. I'm so sorry, friend. I just mean like you both share those major attributes, even though they're very different people. And so yeah, like we'll do that. I'll just sort of try to explain. Yeah. So the reason I say that is because I think that Crepo is very persistent in trying to get better, and also in trying to understand the game and just be like a good player. I think he's also very smart if you understand his jokes are very smart, that kind of thing. And then I think he's actually a very social person. Like he tends to be friends with a lot of people, and that, again, that's probably one of the reasons why he's on the analyst desk and will probably have a career ahead of him beyond his pro play.
Okay, Sjokz.
Oh God, this is these are all like my.
I mean, the trick here is I'm sort of getting you to also explain what you think of the person,
yes,
but also the player. So this is what we're doing here.
Yeah, no, I completely understand. It's just so funny because like it's so hard to make like these public statements about such close friends, especially realizing that they're going to see this.
That's a good question.
Yeah. You can leave this all in, by the way, my struggle or whatever, because I hope people understand that it's not like the simplest thing, and will hopefully forgive me if I end up doing something that they disagree with.
So what is Sjokz for Travis?
God. How do I do this? I'm like trying to dodge around like insults. Not that I want to insult Sjokz, but I don't want it to be anything where she feels insulted inadvertently by something that I mean is a compliment, because it's such a weird way to quantify this stuff. I actually think that Sjokz is like Ocelot, in the sense that, like, not in all ways, but in these specific senses. One is, I think that she is very, very concerned with improving. I think Ocelot is. Like, Ocelot really wants to be, like, the best player. And, like, even today he posted a picture of himself on Twitter that said, me and Season 4 MVP, and it was just a picture of himself. You're the best, Ocelot, never change. And so, I think that Sjokz really wants to always go beyond like to grow a lot. I also think like she has like a very, very good presentation. That, again, as I've said previously, like she is somebody I look forward to, that kind of thing. Like very professional, continuing to improve that, wants to still be fun and do stuff for the community, and wants to have like be very community and fan minded, but definitely wants to, like, I don't know, like she just has like a really good presentation. And Ocelot is the same way. Like this dude just knows how to present himself in a really professional, cool way. And generally speaking, like the other thing about this is that they are both, in my mind, very cool people who are able to just sort of like amplify their already positive existing abilities to when they present themselves to the public. Oh boy.
Okay, this one will sound a bit strange since this person was a player.
Okay.
Okay, Jatt.
Jatt. Oh crap. Okay. Jatt is someone I know a lot less personally. Like I've talked to him and that kind of thing, but he's not nearly as close to me as Slasher at Sjokz. Okay, I've got a little bit. I might have to mix in two players for this. Oh, he's gonna love this. He's gonna really love this. Oh, this is my end of my friendship with Jatt, and even though I mean this all as compliments, I would say Jatt is a mixture. If I'm allowed to do mixtures, I'm just gonna fucking do it. All right, Elimination and Reginald, because Jatt is so analytical, and I think that Elimination is a very, very like his style of play and like the way he approaches things, even kind of his personality, is very, very analytical, and I think that's just sort of the way, like from my personal experiences with Jatt, which are again somewhat limited, like he tends to be very much like this analytical guy. I say Reginald because I feel like Jatt, much like Reginald, is always willing to do the thing that might not earn him the respect of the fans, or whatever, or say the thing that like he's willing to be outspoken or whatever. Like this goes all the way back to like the WCS stuff with early State of the League. Like he's always willing to tank the heat, you know, for like an opinion or a thought. Maybe he'll completely disagree with that, I don't know. But on the other hand, something that is true of both Reginald and Jatt is that I feel as though they both want to, kind of both secretly want to, you know, kind of still be that good guy, you know. Like Jatt, whenever he came on and juggled on my show after, like I will never be able to forget that about Jatt, is that after he got put on blast on my show for supposedly cheating his way into WCS or doing something sketchy or whatever, he came on the show and was just very friendly and fun and silly and like juggled during one of the breaks. And I think that much like Reginald, he will probably always negotiate, especially if he steps away from being a caster for Riot, which I don't know if that'll ever happen, and tends to be somebody who puts like more opinions out there. Like I think that they will always sort of navigate the space where they have to balance like their willingness to just sort of be like the guy tanking the heat and that kind of thing, with also like a desire and tendency towards trying to also be still someone that people can enjoy. Holy shit, this shit is next level. Anyway, continue.
Okay, this one's going to come completely out of left field. Kelby, a.k.a. Sjokz,
Okay.
a.k.a. Doublelift's handler.
Yeah. Oh god. Oh, I think I got this. I feel like I can just pick a support player as an example. Holy crap. Okay, this is perfect. I'm so glad I got to know Tabe over the past couple of weeks, because I'm going to say Tabe. Uzi is a very young AD carry that, from what I understand, can be pretty emotional, and but is still like highly skilled. And Tabe needed to be there, I think, in order to unlock like Royal's potential this season. I think that Kelby is that to CLG. Like he's literally sort of like the guy that's taking care of all these guys that, in a way that a lot of managers do, that like sort of needs somebody there to help take care of him. I mean, he certainly needs to be there to help take care of Doublelift. And Doublelift would never, I think, have a problem with him saying that. Maybe he would, I don't know. But like he does a lot for Doublelift and literally like supports Doublelift, because that guy can be kind of ridiculous. And in a grander scale, does that for CLG. On the other hand, like Tabe is also pretty smart about like business stuff. Like it seems like his decision for retiring and like his understanding of what he wants to do next and all that kind of thing, from speaking with him personally, is very smart and like reasonable, and isn't like necessarily selfish so much as just like a, hey, this is a pretty good idea. And I actually think that Kelby, though he is still learning, and there's no way like the Alex Garfield or Jack of like business like success, is actually trying to do a lot and get himself started on the path to becoming like a pretty successful business person and manager in esports.
Thorin.
Oh boy, Thorin. Oh, okay. Like it's great. I like the Thorin one because you have very strong traits. Because you tend to be very, very outspoken, very, very persistent, sometimes a little combative. But I like to think that deep down inside there's a heart of gold. So if I hadn't already used Reginald, I feel like that might be a kind of a safe place to go. But and I don't actually know him very personally, but I actually think that Aranea is actually pretty similar to you. Like he's got like this, you're very passionate, especially talking to you. I don't know how much of that comes across in the Grilled interviews, but I think people can look at like when you visited Who's League to talk about format stuff. Like you're very, very passionate, and you very, very much believe in this stuff, and you're very willing to call out things that you think are messed up or whatever, because you want to get to it. And I think that translates a lot, very, very well. I think that sometimes people are like, and again, I'm not sure how much this translates over in your Grilled interviews, like, because I maybe have communicated with you in ways that maybe fans that are familiar with the content haven't, but I think that at first people can be like a little overwhelmed by the stuff that you say, and even maybe to a certain extent your personality. But once people actually get to know you, they understand that like there's a lot more beyond just like a very strong statement about X company or X player or your thoughts on that kind of thing. And that's generally like the sentiment that I get from Aranea. Aranea also seems like he's like, you know, it's pretty easy to get on like his bad side or to end up in a conflict with him or whatever. And I mean, I still don't know you very well, but I feel like I've heard that over the years there's been people that have had like gone through rough patches with you, but then like you seem to always be willing to sort it out once like you actually talk to that person and get to know them and understand them more, for the most part. And so yeah, like I would probably go with Aranea. And maybe I've pissed off both of you by saying this, and maybe like 2 days from now you guys will both not be angry with me anymore. So well, that would be very much like both of you, I believe.
Okay, so we've beat around the bush now.
Okay.
Travis.
I don't like to. You know, I know I'm not some sort of special snowflake, where I'm not going to pretend like, oh, there's just no pro player that's like me, or there's no way of describing me because I'm so freaking unique. But I think that the problem, like the difficulty that comes from answering this question is that, you know, it's very easy to sum up other people and certain qualities or that kind of thing.
Well, how do you see yourself?
Yeah. And so that's the question, right? Because for me, like, this is kind of personal, right? But I see myself very much in flux, especially this year. There are like crazy personal things that happen that I don't ever really make public. That I mean, people will see that I have changed a lot over the course of the year in a lot of different ways. Like my content, and to some extent, what people have said has become, some people say better. Like my presentation has become different. Like I look different. Even my friends will say that, like, I don't know, I'm just like Nick Allen at some point in time in an interview, I think at PAX, said something like, made a joke about Travis 2.0, right? Like there's definitely a big right now push for me to internally as an individual to grow and change, and to better myself in a way that hadn't existed for a long time. So it's hard for me to give like generic qualities to myself because I am changing a lot. That being said, the fact that I just spent so much time talking about myself, one of the very, very first things you can talk about is like I'm very, very arrogant, and I have a very big ego. I don't think that that's that unique to myself.
You haven't narrowed it down for your players yet either.
Yeah, right. So yeah. So like first off, personalities, casters, these guys oftentimes have very big egos and are very arrogant. Same thing with players. In a lot of ways, I feel like I'm still trying to learn what I'm supposed to do with my life, especially at this point in time. Like not professionally, right? But just like who I want to be as a person. I tend to mess up a lot, and I try to learn from that, and I don't always, I'm very stubborn. And I actually know now, and in a moment of horror, who I'm going to say for this. In a very, very horrible moment of horror. I actually think that the person or player that I am most like is Doublelift. And actually, like as different and as strange as our relationship seems maybe sometimes across camera, and people have talked about it a lot, like we're actually very, very similar people. And we have similar personalities. We're just like different sides of the same coin. And in a lot of ways, like the point that he's at in his life and the things that he's trying to figure out, I'm trying to figure out like on a different level. And hell, I'll even say that like we're both kind of needy on our friends or whatever. I don't know. There's just a lot of similarities between the two of us. So yeah, I like that. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of like the fact that he's my good friend, so maybe he's one of the people that I think of. But I wouldn't have thought of him I didn't think of him first when I was like thinking of different pro players. But yeah, like it's probably he's probably the one that I'm most like personality wise.
Okay, do you have anyone you want to thank or say hello to?
Hello, Thorin. Thank you for doing this interview with me. You had to listen to my personal ranting about stuff and my self-centered, arrogant thoughts on stuff. Thank you for the grilled. That's really cool of you. If so, like oftentimes one of the problems that I have is that I like say a lot of stuff just spur of the moment off the top of my mind, and it comes back and bites me in the ass, and I'll think about it even like a day later and be like, oh crap. So I might have said that at some point or like multiple things in this interview. I hope that people who see that understand like I didn't mean to like offend anyone. And generally speaking, here's like a little bit of a safety net for myself. Like I'm still figuring shit out and have been for 2 years and more, and I still am trying to figure out like what my attitudes on things are, and they change often. So just because I said something here doesn't necessarily mean that it'll be the same in a year or so. If people come and say, oh Travis, you said this thing, or if something I said contradicts back then, you know. So other than that, thank you to the fans so much for supporting me. As I've said, they're a very big focus of part of the reason I do the content that I do. Thank you to Slasher so much for the assistance he's given me. I actually owe him a decent amount, a disturbingly large amount, and I like to always put him on blast or whatever, but actually Rod's a very good guy and doesn't deserve a lot of the stuff that the community has given him. And thank you to Doublelift for actually ending me up in this room, or my ending up in this room doing an interview about myself, and for the success that he's done. And he still helps me out in silly ways. I still help him out in silly ways. My God, Worlds has been ridiculous. We're going to go on a vacation together in Seattle and Vancouver after this. Other than that, thank you to all my friends in the industry. Again, those guys are all great. Everybody that's in the secret Skype chat, they know who they are. And that sounds much more sinister than it actually is in the context of this interview. Thanks to Riot Games for making League of Legends and for making like a pretty decent ecosystem for League of Legends esports. They do some good stuff, they do some bad stuff, mostly, in my opinion, good stuff. And yeah, thanks for everything. Thanks GameSpot, you guys are awesome, everybody that I work with there. And yeah, that's probably it. Sorry if I forgot to thank anyone. I'm not used to doing shoutouts myself. Thanks, Thorin.